Hi, DS Awesome staff. It's Chris Weber and Anthony Claypool, and today we'd like to talk about questions and answers. So there's a document on your sidebar of the website that just discusses questions and answers that are pertinent to our DS Math for the Common Core. So let's go to our site right now. I've logged in to my Distinctive Schools account. I clicked on Sites. Now I'm clicking on iTeacher. So on the left-hand sidebar, the very first link is DS Math Q&A. And I just wanted to talk through some of this. I know y'all can read these things, but we just wanted to give you an idea, in addition to what you're kind of seeing, about what questions we've received from y'all and what we think are the good answers to them that we've collectively kind of determined. The first is, why are we doing this? Well, lots of good reasons. The Common Core is a common. It represents a pretty ginormous difference from what the Illinois Learning Standards look like in a variety of different ways. Prominently, the differences are there are fewer standards per grade level, and the depth and complexity that's required of students in terms of their understanding is much greater. So we needed something different, and boy, we are so happy because instead of going and spending tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars on a curriculum that doesn't exist yet, by the way, but that would probably not be a perfect match. Instead, our teachers themselves, you guys, you developed this product, and it's just getting started. We think it's quite good, but it can become so much better, and it will throughout our collaborative work. We just needed it. That's why we're going in this direction. A couple of really important questions are, how will this impact ISAT scores? Well, that's a great question, because for 2 more years we'll be giving a test, the ISAT, that's based on the Illinois State Learning Standards, not on the Common Core standards. Now, my firm belief, I'm willing to bet on this, is that our kids, with doing DS Math for the Common Core based on the Common Core standards, they'll do better than ever on this ISAT test. Why? Why do I say that? Well, because less is more. If our kids develop more mastery in thinking and problem solving, and are able to do more, spend more time on fewer important concepts, I know some of the stuff that's on the ISAT won't be quote unquote covered, but I actually believe that our kids will be able to transfer their thinking to these different settings. Now, we're hedging our bets a little, because in the maps we include references to perfection learning. So in grades 3 through 8, we'll have our perfection learning books, and you certainly are welcome to use those to fill a couple of these holes. In other words, to address some topics that are not going to be addressed by the Common Core. They're simply not there. And so that's a way we're hedging our bets for at least the next couple of years. What about NWEA? How will this impact NWEA? Well, you guys, NWEA is a unique test. So the question being asked, how will this impact NWEA scores, could have applied to Saxon. And the reason I'm saying that is, or it could apply to Illinois Learning Standards. The reason is because NWEA tests are adaptive and they're differentiated. So in your 4th grade class, for example, you'd have kids at many different zones of proximal development, at many different levels, and taking a different test, fall, winter, and spring. So I don't know if we can really teach to the NWEA test, or if we should. If we do a great job of differentiating our instruction and expecting quite a lot of our kids and going into greater levels of depth and complexity, they'll do fine on NWEA. So what is NWEA for? Well, instead of us teaching to the NWEA test, the result of NWEA can really, really inform our instruction, primarily through RIT scores and Descartes. So it allows us to figure out where kids are, where their zones of proximal development are. And so we should continue to use our NWEA data in that regard. It also gives us a really great measure of whether kids are growing. Growing on what, you might ask? Maybe not growing on the Illinois Learning Standards, maybe not growing on the Common Core standards. We have other ways of assessing that. But we can determine whether they're growing in their math knowledge. And so we think that both ISAT and NWEA scores will kind of take care of themselves, but we also recognize that they're on your mind. And so any questions that you have, or any ways in which we can support you in using NWEA in particular to inform our instruction, please ask those things. The next commonly asked question is, what are the expectations for kids? And in other words, what are the expectations for teachers? What is non-negotiable? And this was addressed in the summary of DS Math as well, but I'll really quickly summarize it now. What we expect is for all of us, me, everybody out there, to do whatever it takes whenever we can to help kids master the Common Core standards of mathematics. That's going to be the non-negotiable. Are we going to be perfect? Well, maybe not within the given block, but by golly, by the time they're done with us, their mathematical learning is going to have exploded because we're going to do it together. We expect all teachers to use the CFAs at the end of each block so that we can have collaborative conversations about what seems to be working and maybe some areas in which we can grow. We really expect all teachers to collaboratively plan, to collaboratively analyze, and to collaboratively share. And Teacher Studio, as an example, is going to be one of the ways in which we can do this. And we expect all teachers to design instructional experiences for kids that are engaging, participative, and interactive, that involve a lot of check-ins to see how kids are progressing within a given unit, within a given lesson. And also that we take those opportunities to provide immediate and specific corrective feedback. So those are kind of our expectations. Those are the non-negotiables. So what are we tied on? Well, we're tied on these are the essentials. These are the Common Core standards in a block, and this is the way we're going to assess it. We're also tight on collaboration, and we're tight on the interactiveness of our lessons. But there's a lot that's loose. That's the art and the science, the magic of teaching, and we encourage that type of exploration. And then we'll be able to determine where that exploration is working well and where we might consider some other approaches. And that's kind of the next question. What's the latitude that teachers have? What is negotiable? And we really do encourage you to innovate and share. And then we're going to learn from one another about what seems to work best. How do common formative assessments fit into grading? In other words, how do I assign kiddos a grade with these rubric scored CFAs? Well, you guys, maybe we should ask a bigger question, which is, what's the purpose of grading? Well, it's information for our parents, right? That's why we assign grades. That's why we have report cards, is to say that, look, at this point in time, right, in 2 weeks, I don't know. But at this point in time, this is what the kiddo knows. Now, are we averaging those grades? Is it a percentage that represents what kids know? Well, standards-based grading would make us maybe question that. But the point is, how are we filling out grades? Well, we're gathering evidence of student learning. That evidence can come from the common formative assessments. That evidence can come from quizzes. That evidence can come from what you glean on your daily exit slips. It can come from IXL problem types that you assign to all kids or to individual kids. So if we start thinking about what we're gathering as evidence as opposed to tests or percentages or other things, I think grading will maybe be simplified. Now, I'll be the first to admit that we might have to educate our parents on what we're expecting of kids, but and how we're going to be reporting out their performance. But it's simply not sound statistically to say that because the kid has a 76%, they have a C. What does that mean? What's more sound is to say this is the level of understanding that this student has demonstrated. And we believe that our CFAs will get us closer to being able to answer those questions. Next commonly asked question, scrolling on up, is, do you have to write lessons in the format of the anchor lessons? And the answer is no. The anchor lessons represent direct instruction. They represent a gradual release of responsibility model, but a fairly structured way of doing that. What we really want is that you organize your instruction that involves the 4 elements of gradual release that are included in the summary of DS Math, and that are also represented in the anchor lesson template. What we really want is for kids to have multiple opportunities to engage in the content with you, watching you, with one another. What we really want is for them to demonstrate mastery of the content. Next commonly asked questions. What happens if I get off pace? Well, that's a great question, and I'm going to give you a snarky answer. Please don't get off pace. Now, why do I say that? Well, you guys, we can't have a guaranteed viable curriculum for kids if we spend twice as long on a block as we plan to do, because we simply won't get to other things. So what we've tried to do is design blocks that give us a lot of time to do fewer standards than we've probably done in the past. So we hope that that will prevent us from getting off pace. We have to stay on pace. So if what we find is that at the end of the block, we still have content to cover, let's give that CFA and let's move on to the next block's instruction. Now, how can I say that? Well, how is that going to be possible? Well, the next block's instruction, you guys, is going to build off the prior block's instruction. So we'll work together to make that happen. But let's not get into the habit of getting off pace, because the ramifications are pretty huge. So the only expectation we have in terms of how you use your instructional days is that you give the CFA at the end of the block. What you do in the block in terms of how many days you spend on this topic versus that topic, that's up to you, and you should utilize that flexibility to ensure that you do get to the most important things for kids to know. What if my kids don't do well? Well, that's a good question too, and we'll know that well before the end of the block. We'll know that before the end of the block when the CFA is given, because you will have given exit slips and you'll have assessed student understanding in other ways. But the answer is that we'll differentiate. So within a lesson, and the anchor lessons we've written, there are opportunities for you to meet with small groups of kids who need more support on that day's stuff. Okay, so that's one thing you'll do to respond when kids aren't doing well. The other thing we'll do is we'll work collectively to intervene with kids for whom we have evidence that their learning isn't where we want it to be. You guys, that's what we're going to do. We're going to work together in that regard. So we had interventionists last year. We think this year we'll have a similar model in which there are folks whose primary job, at least during that portion of the day, is to work with kids who need more support. Well, not only will we know who they are, given our end of block CFAs, we'll know what content they need more support on. We'll even know the types of strategies that have been used already that maybe haven't been as successful for these guys anyway. And so we'll be able to respond in that manner. So we want to get to the point where a high percentage of our kids are understanding our instruction every day and every block. But I think we can predict that we're going to have to be prepared to support kids when they need extra time and different types of supports. So if your kids don't do well, that's a temporary problem. We're gonna fix it. Okay, guys, that's part 1 of Q&A, and we will come back to talk about some other frequently asked questions.